Race. Competing visions for the future of New York City. A Democratic socialist, a guardian angel, a three-time governor, and the incumbent. Welcome to Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote. I'm S.E. Cupp. You were at candidate events today. Tell me what you heard and what you saw.
Mayors have three jobs. You got to keep crime low, quality of life high, and the tax base grow.
And there are going to be strange twists and turns before the votes are counted and the dust settles.
I think that much we can count on. Let's get right to it. Welcome to Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote, where we're watching the all-important New York City mayoral election for the next 14 weeks. Why? Because it's the thing everyone's talking about. What does this mean for the Democrats? What will this mean for midterms? And what will it mean for Trump and Republicans? All eyes are on New York City, and we've got it all covered right here. I'm S.E. Cupp. Let's get right to it. Joining me later in today's show, we'll talk to a longtime New York City politico and activist about how important it is to have accountability and transparency among the candidates running for New York City mayor. But first, let's get to the freshest news from the campaign trail. Joining me now is Katie Honan, a reporter for The City and host of the FAQ podcast. Welcome, Katie.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So a new report in the New York Times today on the issue of New York City public schools and how little it came up during the Democratic primary. In New York City, it's the NYPD and schools and teachers unions that are typically the most important institutions politically. So first, what do you make of the fact that schools, which have been dogged by failing literacy rates and huge inequality gaps, what do you make of the fact that schools weren't a major issue in the primary?
I think most mayoral elections, particularly the primaries, certain topics kind of become the issue du jour, right? Whereas schools, this has been a generational issue depending on where your school is. With the Democratic primary winner, Zohran Mamdani, he went to a specialized high school and he's kind of walked back. What he initially wanted was to change the specialized high school exam, which is a kind of a lightning rod issue of should we expand those schools? Should we change the exam? Should we allow, the schools tend to not be as diverse as they actually had been even 30, 40 years ago. So I think, if you look at 2021 primary, it sort of became an issue of public safety. Public safety was still dominating there. But what we had this year in 2025 is affordability. But I will argue that within affordability and the affordability umbrella, schools are an important part of that, right? People are going to public schools because, that's an affordability issue. And you're, thinking of the teachers union and the police unions and their importance. I actually think that some of the other unions are actually more important when it comes to politics in terms of they can get their members out. The NYPD and the teachers unions, UFT in particular, there's not a residency requirement. So I think a lot of times those unions, they may endorse people, but the members are not necessarily living within the 5 boroughs and eligible to vote. There's a lot of other unions, whether it's DC 37, 32BJ and things like that, that can be more important to a race.
Interesting. And the other part of this New York Times story focused on Mamdani, and how he hasn't really put out a comprehensive plan for schools. He's talked about that testing requirement. He's talked a lot about free universal childcare, but less about the 900,000 students in New York City's public schools. And now that he's the front runner, folks in the school system orbit are saying it's imperative that he start offering up a full agenda. What are the potential landmines for him as he does that?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, the specialized high schools, it's a little bit of a niche issue. And I've argued that sometimes it's not as significant as people make it out to be. I think, not that I went to a specialized high school, but some people in the media, because they care deeply about it, they make it a huge issue. But that's one landmine. I think also just figuring out how to raise test scores, but not making tests the main focus. That's an issue I hear with both parents and teachers, that this Bloomberg era obsession with test scores takes away the actual education. You have these sort of niche education issues where we had different reading curriculum. We haven't heard him speak that much about that. So I think those are the issues that are going to come into focus as we get closer to November. But I will also say, I can't think of any other candidates' extensive schools and education plan as well, whether it's the people who are still here, whether it's Cuomo, Curtis Lewa, Jim Walden, another independent, and even Mayor Adams. A lot of the promises he made about schools in 2021, he has not finished or completed.
Yeah, it feels like affordability and it's opposite for Mamdani. Crime have really set the stage for this election. We'll see if other issues emerge as we get closer to the general. Let's shift gears. This week, Trump has dominated the news around this election with reports that he may wade in, may not, may have had a phone call with Andrew Cuomo, may not have. We know Trump is unpopular in New York City, but both Republicans and Democrats are trying to nationalize this race. Trump is going to get in it one way or the other. What do you predict when he does?
I wish I knew because it is. Yeah. I think when it comes to President Trump, it's so hard to figure out what he's going to do or say. And even the reporting from the New York Times, Cuomo denied it, Trump denied it.
Right.
It could still potentially be true. I think everyone wants to distance themselves publicly from President Trump, but any support that they could have. And I think what you have is a lot of panic from conservative Republicans, but then also conservative Democrats who were so terrified of the Democratic primary winner who won with more than 12%. Between him and Cuomo, they're so terrified that I think they're really grasping at anybody and anyone to do something, right? We saw this right after the primary. Lots of people said, you have to do something, but no one really knows what to do. So I think we even see that with Trump, whether or not he makes some offhanded remark to endorse, whether it's Cuomo or Adams, who knows? I mean, it is interesting that Curtis Lee, with a Republican, probably has one of the worst relationships with President Trump than Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams. It seems like they have, it's just old school New York City beef, which I have no other, I don't know the full story, but that just seems like New York City guys beefing. When you're in the city for that long, as both Donald Trump and Curtis Lee have been, it's gonna come up.
Yeah. Oh, it's gonna be really interesting to watch. As we mentioned, we've talked a lot about affordability and crime on this show, but there's another issue that's important in New York City, and that's immigration. Trump is targeting blue cities for their immigration policies. And a couple weeks ago, you wrote about his administration suing the city over its sanctuary city policies. Now, sanctuary cities are not popular nationally, and polling shows that, the immigration issue favored Trump and Republicans in 2024. But in New York City, where Democrats outnumber Republican voters by as much as 8-1, how are voters looking at immigration and the way Trump and the federal government are targeting folks in New York City?
I think there's been more of a backlash to what President Trump is doing than some people might even expect, because what we're seeing is not targeted, smart takedowns of violent people as President Trump has promised. But what you're seeing is people forcefully detained at 26 Federal Plaza when they're going for immigration hearings, which they're doing what they're supposed to do. You're hearing of high school students who are being detained in immigration hearings and being sent out and unable to be found. I think the federal government's policy of doing this in this haphazard and really violent and aggressive way will only backfire in a place like New York City. I think even the most conservative New Yorkers, they understand the role of undocumented people in New York City, and that the immigration process in the country is so complicated and complex that people come here and they just want to make a living ways that they do it. People want criminals off of the streets, but we don't see much of that with this administration. My colleagues are at 26 Federal Plaza almost every day. You are just seeing masked men grabbing people when they're doing their immigration hearings. So I think that tactic could not backfire, but I don't think it's as popular here because, look, we have more than 8.4 million people in New York City. And I think you recognize that we all know undocumented people, and how would we all feel, anyone, if someone was just grabbed off the street. There's a bicycle outside of 26 Federal Plaza. Someone parked it there when they went in for a hearing, and it's been there for weeks because they never came out. And I think that for a lot of people, even if they are very conservative, that alarms them.
That's really interesting. And how does that impact Eric Adams, the incumbent mayor, where he is on the one hand trying to run to the right of Mamdani on crime and the way crime impacts immigration, but on the other hand is, I'm sure, very aware of how the federal government is weaponizing that issue in the city?
I think he tries to play both sides, but he is aware, as a former police officer, the reason that these sanctuary city laws initially existed was to protect people. If you are an undocumented New Yorker and you're a victim of a crime, the police want you to come forward and say, I was a victim of a crime, because it helps them with crime. If you are an undocumented person and if you're afraid that if you go to the police station and report a crime and then you're going to get hauled off by immigration officers, there's no incentive for you to go. So even as the mayor has kind of had this positive relationship with President Trump and discussed his concerns with the asylum seeker crisis and getting criminals off the street, he still understands the importance of a sanctuary city.
Again, another really interesting issue, and it didn't come up as much in the primary. We'll see now that we're in a general if immigration emerges as an important one. Katie Honan, thanks so much for being here, and thanks for your reporting.
Thanks so much.
Up next, we're talking about transparency and accountability on the campaign trail from the candidates. Important, but is it possible? We'll be right back with more Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote. We're back with Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote, where we are laser focused on the New York City mayoral election. And joining me now to discuss the bigger picture is Lindsey Boylan, a Politico and activist who is no stranger to New York City politics and is a whistleblower against former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you so much.
So you did something really interesting during the primary. You organized against Andrew Cuomo, and it was obviously effective, but talk about what specific messages worked best as you did that.
Sure. A few things. So obviously he has a harassment problem. That's what 3 investigations found. But one of the key things we did was, and I tried to lead with, is talk broadly about abuse of power. That harassment is just one piece of his many abuses of power, whether we're talking about writing a book during COVID, preventing other leaders from leading. All of these things, including the harassment that I experienced, are examples of abuse of power. Secondly, talking in detail about some of the more egregious cases. You know, he sexually harassed a trooper whose job it was to protect him with her life. He sought out legal documents, gynecological records from one of his younger victims who's the same age as his daughters. I tried to highlight that most of the women are significantly younger than myself. I'm the grandma of the group, you know, just to highlight the age differential and the power differential. And these things really struck people. And I think thirdly, focusing on ranked choice voting, because in New York City, this is something that people, in some sense, this is only our second round with it. People didn't understand it. But in a way, I talked about it, focusing on finding 5 good apples in the city of New York. And I think it made it easier. I and many others in the anti-Cuomo movement, even the Working Families Party and DSA and the different campaigns could get on board with rank your 5 people and make sure Andrew Cuomo isn't one of them. So really broadly talk about his abuses of power for people who don't care about harassment, going into the details of what he did and how bad they were, and then really emphasizing ranked choice voting and doing explainers for people on how they could rank several people, just not him.
And what kinds of voters in New York City were drawn to this message? I think we know typically, and at least nationally, getting folks out because they want to vote against someone else doesn't necessarily work. You have to give someone to vote for. Yeah. So what kinds of voters did this work with? How were you able to turn out voters on a message of this guy's terrible?
All right. I think when we know 45 and under, which showed up historically in this race, they were all against him. And we see that in the numbers and they play out. But I think this combination of talking about abuse of power, there was this No Kings rally that drew tens of thousands of people. We held a press conference there, including several of the major candidates, including Brad Lander and Zoran Mamdani, and connecting Cuomo to Donald Trump. That abuse of power message worked for people that would have been inclined to support Cuomo. And we were handing out literature and stickers afterwards and during that, making that connection. So that broadened the group. And I do think combined with this ranked choice voting education, where you saw Brad Lander and Zoran building alliances, where you saw the Working Families Party endorsing a ranking system, many smaller groups endorsing a group of people, those two things, telling how terrible he is. And then to your point, people don't just want a negative message, explaining that you can choose 5 people. And even if you don't like your number 5, filling that ballot out was really important. And I think we saw that Zoran actually increased his win when you gamed out the ranked choice voting system. So that really did work largely.
So what do you change now as an activist, as an organizer? What do you change now that we're in a general? Do you have a different roadmap going ahead?
Well, I think for one, it's only helpful that he won the nomination because some of the most difficult battles that he had to fight were with the establishment within our own party. You had the Brooklyn Democrats going with Cuomo. You had supporters from the Manhattan Democrats, Keith Wright's son, actively campaigning, members of Congress for Cuomo. For the most part, you really haven't seen anyone come out for Cuomo now. So he is the Democratic nominee. Describing him as such is a hugely powerful tool. Because,
Mamdani.
yes, Mamdani, because
Yeah.
he didn't have that to going into it. And I think now, I don't think it's a secret to say it's really helpful to have Cuomo, Adams, and Sliwa in the race because in the general,
Sure.
Democrats obviously outnumber significantly Republicans as registered voters, but this is not ranked choice voting. And so it's a winner take all situation. And those folks, we want them to stay in the race and they will cancel each other out. And I think now, and very recently you've seen this, any connection to Trump is really toxic. And Cuomo has a lot of connections to Trump. So I think that's something you're going to see continue to be emphasized. We saw it yesterday when there was that New York Times piece. And that'll be something that is really highlighted a lot.
You say there's no lane for Cuomo anymore. And, it certainly seems like Zoran Mamdani is the front runner. We had Errol Lewis on a bit ago, and he said, listen, there are no shoo-ins. Anything can happen. Are you sure there's no lane for Cuomo?
Anything can happen. I think the effort to really make sure that Zoran wins is much more about giving him a mandate. So he wants to do some things that Albany won't want to do, including increase taxes and do some really programmatic changes. And so I think I'm more focused, and others are in the community, on making sure that he has a significant lead. They say anything can happen in politics, and usually does. So anything could happen. But I think that's wish casting to suggest that Cuomo has a likely chance to win this, particularly with the number of people in the race. And he knows that, which is why he is behind the scenes trying to get people like David Patterson to, hold press conferences telling people to get out of the race if they're not leading.
I have so many more questions for you and so much more I want to talk to you about. So please don't go anywhere. We'll come right back for more Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote. Back here on Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote. One more time with Lindsey Boylan, Politico and activist. Let's talk about Eric Adams, Lindsey. The corruption charges are plaguing him. Is this a hurdle he can get over, though, as the incumbent, especially with things like some new crime numbers showing crime is down? Does that help him?
I think he can perhaps come a little bit up in the polls. I think New Yorkers just lost their faith in him a long time ago. He still has one of his top aide, Ingris Lewis Martin, is still facing corruption, still facing charges. Those aren't going away. And, even when the shooting happened this past week, people were trying to blame Mamdani or talking about whose responsible it is. They weren't even really looking at the current mayor. And I think that speaks to
wild.
Yeah, it speaks to the lack of focus on him and what he's doing. Do I think that he could build back some ground? Yes, and I think he's trying to do that. He's doing a lot of pressers. He's making announcements. I don't think it's going to be enough.
That's such a good point. Like, he is the mayor, and people were asking Zoran Mamdani what he would do.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is that New York City's elected a lot of Republican mayors. And not that long ago, what does it say about voters that a young, inexperienced, far-left progressive is the front runner?
I think New Yorkers are really independent minded. So, Bloomberg, had many reasons why he was elected mayor. I think they force their mayors to go through the gauntlet. There is no media market like New York. You are not eating pizza with a fork and knife and getting away with it. Make it a small point. They make you work for it. And I think Zoran, in this campaign, in the primary, he really proved that the team he's assembled was able to do the work. So regardless of what people say about his experience as an assemblyman and what that, what kind of harbinger that is, he proved that he could raise money, communicate a message, get that media market, not be, trampled by it. And on the reverse, someone who'd been, in the governor's mansion for over a decade, couldn't do the same. And so had been in and around power in Albany for over a decade and more in his father's career, couldn't do the same. So I think they're pragmatic New Yorkers. They want to see their electeds work for it. And I don't think anyone's really worked for it on camera, especially as much as Zoran has. And, one statistic that I think is being talked about, but is worth mentioning again, is this was a renter's race, and the majority of the city are renters, and they chose Zoran Mamdani. And I think it falls pretty much along those lines of renters versus owners. He talked a lot about affordability. He did talk about a rent freeze, and increasingly he's talking about, building more affordable housing. And to the extent that he's perceived as far left, he met with the Partnership for New York, which is a group that I worked pretty closely with when I was the governor's secretary for economic development, so the business person for the state. He's met with leaders from REBNY, which is the real estate board of New York. All of those folks you would perceive as very traditionally business-minded and maybe in opposition to someone like him. But he's making those efforts, and I will say he's pretty adept at doing that. He may be younger, he may be comparatively new to this, but he's more willing to have these conversations than I think Adams, Cuomo, or Sliwa appear even to the average New Yorker.
And that goes a long way. I want to talk about a really important voting constituency, typically women. With this race, we talk a lot about young voters because Mamdani has managed to mobilize them in ways other candidates haven't. But women are, of course, impacted and compelled by lots of issues, right? All of them. In this race, particularly affordability, those kitchen table issues as we're working and trying to provide. But also the flip side of that is security. You've got those security moms, those safety moms who want safe streets, safe subways. They want criminals off the streets. They want to feel like they can send their kids to school and they're going to come home that night. How does that square for Mamdani? Does he have a weak spot among those safety moms who might be into the affordability message, but aren't necessarily there when he talks about cops and safety?
Well, I think, if he were not particularly skilled and not movable, but able to speak across differences, that would be a real problem for him. But, years ago, they keep putting up his tweets, especially Cuomo, saying, talking about defunding the police. But he has said in this, at every moment in this campaign, that he's not defunding. He's talking about maintaining policing numbers. He's said he's open to keeping Tish as commissioner. He has clarified
Jessica Tish, the commissioner of the NYPD.
Who's incredibly popular.
Yes.
She's been serving a short period of time, first female, incredibly popular, perceived as really efficient at her job, a bureaucrat, traditionally speaking. And he's also continues to clarify that when he talks about, building a force that is not focused on policing, but engaging and breaking violence interrupters with mental health crises and the like. I think he needs to continue to clarify this, and he's doing a good job, because what people like Cuomo and Adams and Sliwa are doing is that he wants to defund. Well, that's not what he said. It's not what he's talking about doing. It's not what he's going to do. The good news is that he gets airtime whenever he speaks, so you can bet that he's going to continue to communicate this. But New Yorkers like myself know that one of the biggest challenges we have is people facing a mental health crisis in the city, that we don't have an efficient and comprehensive housing solution for people experiencing chronic homelessness. We basically just, thrown washed our hands of the challenges, particularly after COVID, when it's gotten so much worse. And these are things that he's talking about addressing every day. I think people are concerned, but we also live in a moment in time where New York has historically low crime numbers, even though that's not the perception. So I think he will continue to address those concerns. What he needs to do, which I think he will do, and his team is very smart, and so they know this, that Cuomo's going to try and manipulate his words into things he hasn't said and doesn't mean, and he will continue to clarify that.
He'll have to, right? Because, perception, as you know, in politics becomes reality, and those might be old tweets, but people want more explanation on them. And, as you say, he's been really agile and really willing to go and talk about these things. So it'll be really, really interesting to cover. And Lindsey, we'd love to have you back on as this race continues.
I love that. It's really fascinating and important.
Fascinating and important. You got it. Lindsey Boylan, thanks so much. And we'll see you on Monday for more in-depth conversation, context, and reporting right here on Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote for the next 14 weeks.